and I would like to welcome you to CWR Academy and this webinar, Communicators and the Emerging Future of Religious Life. So just a small topic today. So my name is Robert Cogswell. I'm the Director of Communications for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, and I am a member of CWR's amazing Education Committee. So it was great to see all of you in Memphis, but here we are back on our screens until we meet again in Cincinnati next September. But maybe there will be an in-person opportunity before then. So we'll see how that develops. Before we go further, as is our tradition, we will pause for a moment for a brief prayer. So bear with me as I share my screen. God of grace, illuminate the gifts we have received, our skills and talents, discernment and wisdom, our vocation, our family, friends, and relationships with many, our plentiful blessings of a place to call home and food to nourish us, most of all, the gift of your Son. May we celebrate and share these with gratitude and love for our dear neighbor and for you. Amen. All right, you may still be hearing a number of dings as people are coming in to the session, and you may notice that you have that you're also named Brian Lavelle. So I think there was some issues with the link, so you might want to rename yourself in there too, as a number of you are doing. So let's get started here. We have some operations to quickly review. CWR often offers two styles of presentations via Zoom. So we have our webinars, as we're accustomed to, and flash conversations. And today's presentation is sort of a hybrid of that. And that is, there will be presentation and we will want to engage in conversation. That's why we're seeing all the faces today. So Sister Annmarie will share some presentation content, and then we will open the virtual floor for conversation. And in this format, we'll ask you to remain on mute and to raise your hand. We will do our best to see you and call on you. And you can also use the chat feature when you have something you'd like to add or a question you'd like to raise. So thank you for your patience. We'll do our best to get to everybody. If there are any unanswered questions, Sister Annmarie has offered to be available for follow-ups via email. You will notice that also this is being recorded, and that is one of the things, the distinctions of this one in this hybrid format. Normally with flash conversations where you're seeing all these faces on the screen, we are not recording those. But in the case of a webinar, we would record it, and we are recording today. So just keep that in mind. The session will be available later. So if you need to, online later. So if you need to duck out or you want to recapture something that was said, you can revisit the recording. So, all right, with that being said, it is my great pleasure to welcome Sister Annmarie Sanders. Of course, many of you know her as Director of Communications for Leadership Conference of Women Religious. She's been doing that for about 19 years, and she's a CWR member for 25 years. But here's some things you might not know. So she previously served in congregational communications for her community, Sisters and Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary in Scranton, Pennsylvania. She did that for 10 years. She has a master's in public communications from Fordham University, and her bachelor's degree is in social work from Marywood College. So fun fact, she was a social worker at one point. She's also an associate editor for Latin American Press and an author and editor of several articles and books, and offering retreats and presentations on religious life, communications, and spirituality. So please join me in welcoming our friend, Sister Annmarie Sanders.
Thank you so much, Rob. You did get me a little nervous when you said you had some facts that people wouldn't know about. What's he going to say? So first, my apologies that I was not able to be with you in Memphis. I was so looking forward to that and so disappointed that it didn't work. And I think the thing I was most looking forward to was hearing from you, especially as we speak about this pretty big topic on the emerging future of religious life. So I'm really grateful that we have this opportunity today. I am going to give some input, probably about 20 minutes. And then really the rest of the time, I'm really eager to hear from you if you have questions, but even more so, what are you doing? What are you thinking about this reality that we'll be discussing? I have the greatest admiration for the work that you all do, and I learned so much from you. So please be participative in the discussion, because I'm counting on it. So I can't stress enough what I said in my presentation in Memphis. And that was that I really believe that we as communicators can play a very significant role in helping to shape how religious life will be understood as it goes into a significantly different future. So how we speak about this time can impact both how sisters themselves manage the challenges of the change and how the public understands this change. So the change that I'm referring to is the reality that the vast majority of the religious institutes, and I'm going to talk about it in the United States, although I think I see a few people from outside of the United States here. So my apologies that this is primarily about the reality here, or my data is about the reality here. However, I think it's the same all over, especially in the European countries. So the change that I'm talking to is that the vast majority of religious institutes are comprised of mostly elders, that many communities are coming to a close, and that those that are left will be smaller and will, most importantly, administer themselves in the future probably much simpler, more streamlined ways than they have done in at least the recent past. Smaller institutes simply will not need the same structures that have been in place for decades now, when communities were growing large. So while you were surely aware of these changes in your own communities, maybe your own federations, maybe your own geographic areas, what's different now is that these changes are happening everywhere. And the impact is strong, and the impact is happening very quickly. So these realities are what led LCWR to create this new initiative that we're calling the Emerging Future of Religious Life. And I'm going to share my screen for the next part of this presentation. So this initiative on the emerging future seeks to support those in leadership as they make decisions about their own communities and their future. One of the biggest and most challenging questions is this: in what ways can leadership be shared? So in my presentation in Memphis, I shared some statistics about the rapidly changing demographics on religious life. For as much as we've known that the numbers in religious life would dramatically drop, it's still stunning, at least for me, and I think for many people, to see these changes. So I have some additional statistics that give us a sense of what's happening in religious life today. And these are statistics about the size of the religious institutes that are in LCWR today. And again, I think this kind of data could be applied to the communities in the CMSWR conference in the United States, as well as in many other conferences of religious throughout the world. So these statistics refer to the 304 institutes that make up the members of LCWR. So the numbers on the left are the number of sisters in an institute. So basically, of the 304 institutes, 219 have 100 members or fewer. That's a very, very different reality than just a few years ago. And you can see how those numbers decrease. And those numbers are going to continue decrease even more dramatically, probably in the next 10 years. So on the one hand, we could say, well, that's fine. The numbers are simply getting smaller, and that's true. And smaller numbers really are not the issue. The critical matters right now are questions like these. How do we make this change from large, complex institutes to smaller ones? It's a very layered, not easy process. How do we support those institutes whose ending point is very close at hand? How do we manage this change when the vast majority of religious today are elders and many need some level of care? How do we administer our communities and oversee the significant right sizing of communities when often there's simply no one with the skills or energy to do so within our own communities? And then how do we administer our institutes so that all the responsibilities do not fall upon the very small number of younger, able members who most often want to continue in their ministries and often do not want to spend their lives in internal ministry? So these are just some of the very big, complex questions that communities are dealing with. And at LCWR is trying to look at the whole trajectory and all of the communities that we serve in the United States. So the work for these next 10, perhaps 15 years will be to assure that all institutes have the leadership and the support that they need. So this might involve finding ways to partner across institutes with some of the leadership responsibilities. This is a very different reality than we've ever faced before. This type of collaboration is very different from the kind of collaboration your institutes might be involved in now. So for example, you might be collaborating in a ministry project, or maybe you're sharing a treasurer or a justice coordinator. What we're talking about now is a much more challenging level of collaboration because we're talking about leadership. It's an area where we feel much more reticent about change. And that reticence could be for a number of reasons, but often they have to do with the culture of a community. Each community has its own understanding of authority or how decisions get made. There's sometimes a fear of having someone who doesn't know me at all making decisions about my life, an understandable fear. So making changes in the next few years will most likely not be easy. And these changes will necessitate a lot of flexibility on the part of sisters. At the CWR conference, Sister Mary Pellegrino spoke about the grief that's already in our communities today, some of it unacknowledged and some of it undealt with. So the changes ahead may compound this grief. So all of this means that you're serving in your communications role at a very important time in the life of your religious institute. A challenging time as well as a tender time. You get to journey with your sisters through a period where they may be feeling quite vulnerable and when they may feel anxious about their future. Some sisters start questioning if this way of life has any value anymore, or if what they did in the past had any impact on society, especially if ministries that they served are now closed, where they served are now closed. So you're walking with your sisters at what might be a raw and sensitive time. So I have to say, I think those institutes are quite blessed to have a competent communications professional with them in this hard period. So if you ever have moments of wondering if what you're doing day to day is important or is making any difference, please remember that religious life today needs you. We need the particular skills that you have as communicators. Another reality of these times is that there are some wonderful younger women choosing religious life. Most know that their communities will look very different in the near future, and that their peer support and companionship will probably have to come from outside of their own communities. The younger women coming into religious life are coming from a variety of cultures, and they already are experiencing an intercultural religious life. And they know that that's what's ahead for them. So they're already collaborating across institutes, and that feels very natural and normal for them. So those two realities, this intercultural sense of religious life and this collaborating across congregations, are realities that are very different for the vast majority of women who are in our religious communities today. Most younger members have little interest in building new institutions or sustaining the ones of the past. And they're much more attracted to a nimble, agile way of life that allows them to pick up and go to wherever the need is, where they can serve. They sense that they're being called to live religious life in a different way, but many times they don't even have the language yet to describe what this new way is. So as communicators, it's especially important to understand these shifts because they're shifts that touch the very essence of religious life. Understanding that your sisters are undergoing this change is critical for your work as you craft both internal and external messages. As we sisters make these changes, and as we discern what does it mean to be a woman religious in these times, you can be invaluable in helping us find language and express that identity in clear and understandable ways. So how you craft a message and what you choose to highlight in your communications can help sisters find meaning and help the public understand what's occurring. And I can't overemphasize that need to help sisters find meaning. It may seem kind of common sense or easy for people who are younger than the vast majority of women religious are. But for many of these women, they weren't trained in meaning making. There wasn't that same need to look for meaning in their lives. It was kind of just there and given to them. So anything you can do that stresses that this life is still worth it today and is making an important contribution to society, it could be so helpful. So in my presentation at the conference, I made a few suggestions about what communicators can do to support religious life. And I realize that how much you can implement any of these suggestions depends on your leaders, depends on the culture of communications in your community, and it depends on the communications vehicles that you have. So I would encourage you, if you can, and to the extent that you are able, to be a proactive communicator when it comes to this initiative. Your leaders are being immersed in this LCWR discernment initiative. They hear about it a lot. They're encouraged to participate in it a lot. So perhaps you can demonstrate your understanding of this initiative and provide them, the leaders, with ideas for how your work could support this initiative and their participation in this initiative. the work of making these changes for our communities right now is complex with multiple moving parts. And it's a hard time to be in leadership in religious life today. So often, and understandably, leaders can forget about the necessity of communicating to their members and to the public as they work through these complexities of change. So I would encourage you to think about how you could support this change and present some ideas targeted to this change to your leaders. So I have just 5 suggestions for ways you might consider thinking about, as ways to support what's happening in religious life today. So the first is to tell the stories of the changes occurring in your own institute from a perspective of hope and possibility. And that might seem like common sense, but when you're going through difficult changes, it can be easy to lose sight of the hope and possibility in them. So I would say don't just report on the mechanics of the changes your institute might be going through. Place the emphasis on what could happen or has already happened because of the change. For example, there's so many great stories about what's happened once the congregation may have repurposed, a section of their mother house or sold one of their properties. You think of, within mother houses now, there are brand new educational centers, maybe health clinics, social service centers that are servicing hundreds of people who may have gone unserved or at least underserved in the past. So keep telling those stories, tell them over and over, and remind your sisters and the public of the good that occurred because the sisters were willing to make a change. Secondly, I would say highlight the spirit of your sisters who are moving through the change with graciousness and openness. Their lives often mirror the lives of their peers in society, who also might be experiencing some insecurity and challenge. So could the stories of your sisters and how they're coping with change be a source of inspiration for others? Are there ways that you could creatively take their stories and share them with the wider public? Third, provide ideas and stories that help sisters live peacefully with uncertainty and ambiguity. Can't stress enough that this is a time where sisters themselves need to feel a real grounding, almost a spirituality of ambiguity. We all live in that world of little certainty. So how do any of us develop a spirituality and an interior disposition that helps us stay grounded? So how could you support that needed interior disposition with what you communicate? Are there resources you might be able to share with your sisters that might help them feel a little more grounded as these changes occur? Fourth, share stories of your sisters who are finding ways to live your institute's mission, even when they are no longer engaged in active ministry. This is the reality of the vast majority of our sisters these days, that they're not involved in active ministry anymore. But these are women who probably need to be reminded over and over that what they're doing has great significance. So maybe they're discovering how valuable the gift of presence to another is. Maybe they're finding deeper ways to live their ministry of prayer for the world. Could be that those women discover as they transition to a full-time ministry of prayer and presence, how they do that might give us clues about how religious life might evolve into the future. So I would say really pay attention to those women who are making that transition well. What can we all learn from them? And then my last suggestion would be to Encourage your community to communicate about your institute's realities as openly as possible. Now, I know there are great differences in how our communities do this. Some feel that it's the responsibility of the elected leaders to hold us information on behalf of the Institute, to hold it themselves. Others feel very free to share whatever's happening in regards to finances, property decisions, healthcare decisions, and more. In a time of significant change, like the time that we're in now, open communication is probably much more helpful. Even if some of these realities are not discussed in community assemblies or meetings, or they're not contained in reports or publications, surely your sisters sense that change is on the way, if they're not already deeply involved in the change. They sense it even if they don't articulate it. And often they're fearful, even if they don't articulate it. So it's so much more healthy to acknowledge needed change and to prepare people for it. So if you're working for a community that's been hesitant about sharing information, this may be a time when you encourage them from your own professional expertise to share more openly. So that concludes what I would like to say to you as just a means of beginning our conversation together. And I know Rob is going to facilitate the time of our conversation, but I just encourage you, if you have questions or if you have any thoughts around this, I would love to hear you, and I'm sure we would benefit from hearing one another. So Rob.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sister Annmarie. And please, we're trying to keep an eye on a lot of screens here, so we'll look for raised hands and so forth. But you can throw something into the chat as well. Just to kind of prompt what you've heard. How do these ideas resonate with you? How do they resemble what you're experiencing where you are? All right, Carol.
Hi. So, my perspective is from vocation ministry, and I really appreciated everything that you had to share with us, Annmarie. And I just wanted to throw out there that one of the things I've observed is that when our members have done things that put their elders into contact with young people, men and women both, who are excited about the charism of the organization, of the community, whatever format that might be. There's lots of different ways they do it, but when those groups come together, it's life-giving both for the younger people and the older people. And I think it's a mutual positive energy, because the older members have a chance to tell their story and share some of their, if they're prayer partners, or maybe they're just, sometimes they'll have high school kids come over and record the stories of some of the sisters. There's a lot of different ways that it's done. But when they come together and they share something from the heart, I think it's just mutually good. And just going to throw that out there as a way that both encourages an outwardness for the community in terms of outreach to young people and keeping that exposure to religious life going. And it's also good for the older members, because it's kind of a shot in the arm to just spend time with people in their 20s who are excited about what their ministry is.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. And that's so important that we encourage that kind of generative energy among our older sisters that they're so full of, but don't always have a channel for it.
If you're watching the chat, Sister Beth is wondering about the mix of internal and external communications. I was thinking along those same lines, Beth. Just how that fits in our congregations, our CWR members. How are you responsible for the communications? Is it more internal, more external? Where do you see yourself developing content along these lines? And maybe a follow-up question would be, are there any steps that you are already taking to adjust to these changes in your congregation, whether it's internal or external?
I'm kind of curious too, like, do you find members of the public are aware of this change, and are they following it? Are they curious about it?
I don't know how many communities sponsored something during National Vocation Awareness Week. I know in Chicago there were some open houses. I don't know, I haven't heard any feedback on how those went, but people seem curious to know what's going on with the nuns, if they were educated by them or they had some contact earlier in their life. Sometimes they just like to reconnect.
One of the things we've often had with donors is comments about, well, what's the future of the community, and do we want to provide financial support for something that is dying out? And, you know, we try to address that in a very positive way and say, well, you know, we're thinking about the sisters who are involved in ministry now and who are engaged, you know, even in a ministry of presence. You know, our sisters never not do nothing, and, you know, try to address it from that point of view. And I don't know if anybody else has encountered any of that, but I know that that is a question that comes up often. And, you know, there's a question that I have about, I'll pop it out there, but it doesn't mean we can't end the conversation on the other thing. There appears to, I don't know, this is in my community, I don't know if that's true of other communities as well, but there's sometimes a reluctance to take suggestions or ideas from lay staff in areas that are quote unquote sister stuff. You know, we have a phrase in our place, sister stuff. An example is something that I just saw in the news or in somewhere, and I said, oh, you know, the directional statement that we had a chapter, you know, kind of talked about how we could do this. And I said, you know, we could do this, and the communications could provide this kind of support, and we'd be happy to do that. And the response I got from my general minister was, this is up to the leadership team. And, you know, it's like, yeah, okay. So where do you go with that?
Yeah, I think that's, Rochelle, I totally get that point, and I think we've heard it for years, and unfortunately, this is a dynamic that continues. But I think that's what I was trying to say about the more you can immerse yourself in this LCWR initiative, even though the language of it, there's quite a bit of material on the public side of our website on the discernment process. Like, you know, try to use that language or try to plug into, you know, something, one of your great ideas to make it connect pretty directly with that initiative. Maybe that would help. I'm not sure, but maybe worth a try.
Joanne.
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret to most people that I'm a big fan of what's on the LCWR website that Annmarie just referenced. And part of that is some articles by Mary Pellegrino in past years that talk about, and others have talked about it too, but our voice in the public square. And we certainly get, you know, donors and people who like, you know, looking at, well, religious life has gone down the tube since you came out of schools, or since you came out of the habit, or since you came out of whatever it is that they hung on to. Yet others just absolutely love the fact that we are a voice in the public square, that we are out there. It might be 5 or 10 of us, it might be many more of us. That would be, but we're there in moments, and whether it be statements that we make, or whether it be some of our sisters who do come out and join other neighborhood groups. I think one of the big things that we're looking at is partnerships. We may not be running it all, but we are in partnership with people who are bringing Haitian and Afghan immigrants into the Boston area and what can be done. We're not running the show, but we're there. There's one sister in particular who's part of it, another sister was part of the Haitian immigrants, and together our sisters, associates, and agrégés have collected gazillions of clothes and baby bottles and you name it for these, and all of that it's then how do we tell the story? That's a challenge for me. Well, it's no big deal. We're just doing it. That's the problem I get. Well, we've done this all the time. Why is this a big deal? Why do you need to take pictures of everything we do? And they see me and they go running the other way. No, you're not going to take my picture today. So I said, but I'm constantly saying to them, we need to tell the story in the post. We need to let people know, and so I loved what you said, Annmarie, about the spirituality of ambiguity, because boy, that's right. That nailed it. That was, and it's there on both sides. It's there with our people beyond us, our partners in ministry. It's there with the sisters themselves and with everything in between.
Thanks, Joanne. I have some follow-up questions for you, but we also have a few hands raised. So we'll go to Eileen Dickerson and then follow that up with Sister Beth.
Hi, this is Mary Ellen Glacken. Eileen and I are here watching together. And one of the things that's going on in our community is an interest in sharing the charism of the sisters when the sisters are no longer engaged in active ministry. We currently don't have anybody who is in active ministry. And so we're looking for, we would personally love to have a conversation with other communities that are in that same boat of looking at sharing the charism, not just sharing the story of what the sisters are currently doing, because I think we do a pretty good job of that. But how do we get the story of our charism out to publics that we're not necessarily engaged with currently? We did try reaching out to past communities where we were present, and Atlanta being one of them. And there was great interest, but we don't know quite what to do with that. Like, they're interested in having us do something with them, but they're waiting to find out what we're going to offer them. So we're kind of we're in that in-between time and kind of struggling with what is it, or how do we connect with people when we can't do it physically anymore?
Mary Ellen, I think that's a very common question, and it's one of the things that LCWR is trying to look at, even trying to connect congregations that are in that same place, asking the same questions. So hopefully, as time goes on, we'll find more ways to find vehicles of connection. Hold on, be patient. And it's great that you're already doing this, and you'll be in the forefront of the movement, and maybe can help others just getting started. So thank you for that good work.
And one way people might be able to help in this conversation is to put that question out there either on our listserv or the Discord app and have people respond that way. All right, we have a comment from Ruth Rowland. So that her community decided that they would continue in perpetuity with shared leadership, and that was precipitated by a mission advancement audit in which the donors were asked, what's your vision for the future? want to add anything to that, Roland, before we go to Sister Beth? There she is.
Sorry, I'm working at home, doing too many things at once. The mission development audit came out of the opportunity to participate in Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy's Lake Institute on Faith and Giving mission, Advancing Mission 2.0. And that has really been a game changer for the Benedictine sisters. Once they received that mission development audit and that feedback from the donors, they said, well, we've got to deal with this. And they did that in November 2019 at a community meeting. And since then, we've been working with a local consultant to really firm up the strategic vision framework and to do a strong implementation plan for the next 3 to 5 years, which marries with the directional statements. So it really has pushed them into recognizing that their legacy is to pass their charism to others. And it is very hard, the work that's been done, and it is going to be continuing for quite a while.
Thank you, Ruth. Sister Beth.
So just a couple things regarding that passing the charism. The Dominicans have created something called the Dominican Charism Initiative, partnering with an organization that provides educational resources for religious organizations. We've created a series of units on the Dominican charism, and every congregation pays into that on an annual basis. And that gives all of our congregations and all of our institutions in our congregations access to that. It's really just getting off the ground, and I'm not in a position to know how effectively it's being used. But having been a part of the producing of some of those things, I think it's really good and solid material. So I can ask permission, I suppose, for anyone who'd like to get a sneak peek at that, to be able to see what it is we're doing. And I don't think that's the end all be all, because I don't know that using an app to pass on your charism is the only way or even the best way. But it does provide a baseline for that. And especially when we're trying to form those who are going to manage our institutions in perpetuity, in our absence, it's critical for those groups, I think, to have something that they can use along with human beings present, to try to get that. So I think it's helpful from that perspective, and that's a model that some people could look at. This question of how do we help our sisters and communicate to the public is a real delicate one. And I too sometimes face skepticism that it's a good idea to be transparent about what's happening inside the congregation. So sometimes what I try to do is work backwards. So I put things in the public sphere that then I send back to our sisters and contextualize that for them in a way that helps them to understand how much people really want to know how we are, what we're doing, what our lives are like. And that seems to work pretty well. When we get good feedback on from social media, let's say, or a story on our website, beautiful comments or insights from people, I always share those back to the sisters on our community listserv, because that's a really key way of helping the sisters experience some of those things that Annmarie was talking about, to feel like their lives have meaning, purpose, and value, and to know that they're doing things that are still meaningful for others, even if it's not the kind of ministry that they would have done in the past.
Thanks, Beth. Those are great ideas.
Sister Liz.
Annmarie, thank you very much, and greetings from Europe and from Ireland. And I just want to say that the picture and the statistics that you've outlined in different ways about America echo exactly what is happening in Europe. I've written about that and published it in the tablet fairly recently. One area I just want to highlight that hasn't been mentioned so far is that the fact that we are not the only group that is aging. You know, the whole world and global patterns show an aging population. And so we're not the only group that is diminishing or in decline. And when I studied this a couple of years ago and working with the librarian in Ulster University, he was saying to me how little valid good research is done on diminishment and on decline. It's not in organizational psychology. Very little is found about it in organizational management. And one of the things that we could gift the world with is how to manage diminishment well. You know, as I said, we're not the only group. And so while we are in decline, we have an opportunity to offer templates for how to do this very, very well. Because unlike some of the larger global groups, the Apples and the Googles and so on, that they kind of absorb all kinds of other small groups. So perhaps there's something in looking at the history, the foundations that were maybe never meant to last forever. You know, so that there's a historical piece, there's an archival piece. There is also a future piece of leaving behind us patterns of how we managed these times extremely well. One other thing I just want to mention, Rob, in reply to what you said about, you know, do people recognize where we're at? I'm conscious here in Ireland over the past number of years, various public bodies have put on, you know, farewell services long before we were ready to say farewell. You know, so the writing is on the walls. This is not new, but I think we need to be in sync with the public body as they are with us. There's lots more, Annmarie, just one final thing. I loved your recent article where you interviewed Joan Chichester and the whole idea of following the questions. I thought that was an excellent method of communicating. And maybe if we surface more and more questions, we'll also live into the answers. And thank you for the 5 suggestions tonight.
Mm-hmm. Really, Liz, that was so beautifully stated that, you know, what's happening in religious life is right in sync with so many other areas of society. And I totally agree with you that there's something that we could be modeling about how to do this with graciousness and dignity and the belief that we don't have to go on forever. It doesn't matter if our congregation, some of our congregations come to completion, it's okay. So thank you for writing about it, thinking about it. Hope you do some more writing and we can all benefit from that.
And thank you for staying up late with us. All right, if you've been paying attention to the chat, Brian is putting a lot of resources in there. He's got quite a few links in there. So I don't know how he searches that so quickly, but as people are speaking, he's dropping in different links in there. So you can check that out. We're getting closer to the top of the hour. So I just want to kind of put a call out if there's any other questions. I did have a follow-up I wanted to ask, or something that generated something in me from when Joanne was speaking. All right, Sister Una, did I say that right? Can you unmute?
Thank you also for this very stimulating evening. I like that idea that has been raised about finding a way to share and transmit our charisms. Just recently, maybe it has been precipitated by COVID, that I have set up a few with our own people, is just talking about the spiritual challenges of later life. And just to situate it, to get people want to talk about what it's like to be dealing with the changes that Annmarie has pointed out so beautifully, and also what the resources they call on in order to deal with that. Now, that is even more helpful, the resources that we call on, because generativity doesn't end with childbearing. And it's interesting how generative older people can be. So I just feel that it has been a great, just a good idea to look at the spiritual challenges of the transition between active doing and active being, or soul work of later life. And I think I agree with Liz in this, that our lay partners in life, they want this too. Because when I started to give this to our own community, somebody says, do you mind if I pass this on to my sister, my brother-in-law, my et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much for the opportunity this evening.
Thank you, Una, for those great insights and wonderful recommendations for how to deal with this time of specific spirituality for these times. So important.
Something I wanted to put out there for folks, Joanne, the thing that was raised for me was, when you're interacting with your own sisters and they maybe see you coming and they know you're going to ask for a photo or an interview or something like that, and they go run in the other direction or something like that. So I think we've all experienced that at some level, and if anything, communications is collaborative. So it takes two people. You can't just do it on your own. And so how do we build that culture of communications within our own congregations? I mean, that's something we're always struggling with, and maybe that's a whole separate webinar. But any tips that you want to share that anyone has experienced with that?
It does seem to work when I keep telling them that they're sharing the story of who we are now and into the future. This one sister who's on my case the last few days, because Ginny sent the thing out about the sisters, about the Afghan refugees. And so she's being interviewed by NCR for that article. And she's going, you owe me. And I said, no, I said, the congregation owes you. Plus, I said, you just did too good. He wants to call back and get more information from her and all this. I said, you just did your job that you did was too good. It's your fault. Because she is a very articulate person and very energetic and is at 80 plus. So, to just keep reminding them. One of our chapter calls was to tell the story, and that certainly helped. And I certainly, I cash in on that comment all the time.
Right, sounds good. One of my tips is it's to say it's not about you, it's about the mission. That usually turns people around.
Sometimes the best way to find out what one sister is doing in ministry is to talk to other sisters about her. They love to tell how much wonderful good the other one is doing. They don't want to talk about me because it's not really me. It's just God working through me. But if you say, well, what about Sister Mary? Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe the stuff she's doing. It's wonderful. So sometimes that's what you have to do. And I just, about the Afghan refugees and helping them, I have to tell you this story that we had in community. One of the sisters started a blanket and clothing drive. The Interreligious Council in our community put out notice that they were looking for these things, and the sisters got it. So, you know, she sent me something and I said, this is a great story. We need to let our donors know we're doing this. We need to, you know, put it in our weekly news thing that we send out for all the sisters. And she said, well, you know, I'm kind of nervous about that because not everybody in community or all of our donors agree with that. And I said, it's what we do. We're not going to apologize for what we do. This is our mission. This is our ministry. This is who we are and what we do. And we're not going to apologize for that. And if we have donors who stop giving to us as a result of that, we can't help that. That's not our, you know, that's up to them to live with that. So it's sometimes they do think about that kind of thing, about how it will be perceived out in the public. So.
All right, thank you, Rochelle.
Mhm.
All right, we are at the top of our hour here. And yes, as we mentioned, if there are other follow-up questions, and there's certainly lots of food for future conversation here, we can track it back, develop some new webinars, and also, as we offered, as Sister Annmarie offered, to follow up with her if you have any more conversation you'd like to have with her. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and especially thank our speaker, Sister Annmarie. Thank you so much. As is tradition, we will have a survey that follows this, and the recording will be available on the CWR website as well. Just a couple of, a little heads up in the coming weeks. We have some things to offer you, some post-conference content. So not all of our presenters were able to make it to our conference, but we are still scheduling them all as webinars. So we have several of them coming up. On Tuesday, November 30th, we will hear from Global Sisters Report and Gail DeGeorge. And then the following, a couple days later, we will hear from Kristen Whitney Daniels and Maria Elena Perales on Amplifying Justice. And then the following week, we will hear from Carol and Sister Charlene from NRVC about data you need to know for vocation communications. Those are all, if you registered for conference, you can attend that. That's already part of what you paid for the conference. And then just a day later, we will also have our CWR awards. So we'll get to hear from those award winners as a panel, and to hear the great work that they've been doing. So thank you for joining us. Just two more quick reminders. Remember to share about the new member initiative with your colleagues. It's a phenomenal opportunity to be part of CWR. And also get connected via our Discord app, because there's lots of good content that's happening in there, courtesy of your peers. So thank you for joining us. And until next time, may you experience the gratitude of God's blessings with plenty of food on the table and loved ones to share it with. So thank you. We'll see you soon.